Underdog Collectibles is an online shop run for collectors by collectors. Join them every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday night as they break new products, talk sports, and hopefully you'll pull a great hit to add to your collection. Visit them at www.udogcollect.com and tell them WaxPackHero sent you. Remember, always bet on the underdog. You're listening to the WaxPackHero Sports Card Minute, a podcast where we discuss both the hobby and business sides of collecting. I'm your host, Mike Sommer, and I want to help you buy, sell, and trade your way into a collection you'll love. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. Today, we've got something a little bit different for you. We're not going to be talking about sports cards at all, but we are going to be talking about trading cards. I'm going to be bringing on the show Greg McLaughlin, the host of the Rebel Base Card podcast, and we're going to be talking a little bit about his collecting background and collecting Star Wars cards, both vintage cards as well as modern cards, and he's got some thoughts, tips, and ideas for us if we're interested in expanding our collecting knowledge to something beyond sports. And so I'm going to be bringing Greg onto the show to have that conversation. Greg and I first got connected last fall sometime, and he invited me on the show to talk a little bit about some of the shipping strategies that I use to sell, or when I sell cards to get them in the hands of other collectors, or when I trade cards to get them in the hands of other collectors. And so I've been a guest on his podcast, and now I want to bring him on the show to have a conversation about Star Wars cards. So without further ado, here is Greg. Greg, welcome to the show.
Mike, thank you for having me. This is a pleasure. I love it.
Yeah, I'm glad we finally get a chance to connect for this podcast. It was an honor being on yours several months ago talking about shipping and some of that type of thing. And I've enjoyed our interactions over the last several months via Twitter. And so I'm happy to have you on the show to talk a little bit more about collecting Star Wars cards. And I think some of the non-sport stuff is one of the things that I haven't touched on a lot yet on the show. And so bringing on an expert on all things Star Wars cards, I think is something that people will really look forward to. So welcome.
Excellent. So just to reiterate, I'm not talking about the 2020 Heritage set that I think now I'm building thanks to listening to WaxPackHero. It's starting to burgeon up. So now I don't know what to do with it now. But thank you. I appreciate it. And whatever I can do to help out, I am more than happy to.
Sure. Well, let's start by just maybe giving people a little bit about your collecting background.
Excellent. So for Star Wars, I was a lot of people like to say I was about the right age. I was about 7 when Star Wars, the original movie, came out, and a little bit into, I would say, June, July of 77 is when Topps released the original vintage sets. And I come from a one stoplight town. And there was a local pharmacy that you could get your magazines, comics, and trading cards. And I remember starting to pick up. I don't remember when it started, but I remember picking up the end of the first of what would be 5 series. There was the blue, red, yellow, green, and orange. But I remember that really started me going down there, and they were 15 cents a pack, so it really wasn't that bad. And for a long time, I had a nice stack of that, and really nice and fit in a shoebox pretty well. And to be honest, that kicked into baseball and football cards. I think more baseball. So probably, in between releases of the Star Wars movies, I collected a decent amount of those Topps sets. I remember the Fleers and some of the other brands that came out right around that time. I think when, I guess, the embargo ended, like I said, someone else is a little more into that than I am. But yeah, that kind of became the cornerstone. I think when you're thinking of Star Wars, I always think of the cards, the comics, and the Kenner. That's 2 C's and a K. But it wasn't, when the Return of the Jedi ended in '83, the Star Wars cards sat there for a very long time. And, it wasn't until 10 years later that Topps started releasing the direct market sets, the first Galaxy or the Artist sets. And there's a nice period between that and the Phantom Menace where, Topps was trying different things, wide vision, different kinds of, foil, because at that point everybody was making cards. You couldn't make enough. And then when I was out of the States for a little while. To make a long story short, most of the 90s I lived abroad. And it wasn't until really 2015, if we do it like a lot of folks, when the Force Awakens came back, that I started seeing these Journey 2 sets in Target, and they were done in the original vintage flavor of that blue Starfield, and that sucked me back in. And I went from maybe having a binder of Star Wars cards to now it's probably over 20 in the last 5 years. I really, this is a desperate plea for help, Mike. I don't know where I go from here. But that would be basically kind of a, it's like you keep going, and then you start putting them in binders, and you start, following blogs, and you start looking at Cardboard Connection. You start building your hobby, and it almost like becoming a professional collector, as it were.
So it sounds like obviously because there was a lack of movies and there's that 10-year hiatus that you talked about before they even went back to kind of start celebrating some of the original films, that kind of forced a little bit of a break. Did you actively collect some of those first sets before 2015, or was that 2015 re-entry the point where you started to go back and fill in even some of those sets that maybe came out in the 90s that you referenced?
Yes and yes. Now, I had a good run of the original cards, except for the stickers. When you're a kid, stickers are, they go everywhere. And so in the mid 80s, when I started seeing a couple of card shops come into play, I was able to fill a good chunk of my vintage sets, and actually pick up one of the first times I'd actually picked up, I think, Return of the Jedi Series 2. There was a full set. You were seeing like full sets, and thank God, even a couple of the boxes. I still actually have a couple of the vintage boxes from those, I think, Series 3 and 4, or 4 and 5, I can't remember, which are even worth a lot now, even given the condition of it. And so, I even have some of my, like little Post-its where I was trying to mark off the checklists, because back then those vintage sets, or the first ones, didn't have checklists. But it was when I started getting back in 2015 that filling out, say, the Wonder Bread cards, or going back and finding that I'd had a couple of these OPG Star Wars cards, but I never knew what they were. They were just bilingual. They were English and French. And realizing that Canada had this whole run. And so I started putting together those sets. And it's fun because you're finding out these other countries have different versions of them. Some of them are the same, some have slight variations, and you go back and you're filling them. And so, and then I've been on eBay for, over 20 years. And so you find that, I can fill these in. And then you go, well, now the collector goes, well, the sets are more valuable if you have the stickers. So you go back and fill those in. So, you have several projects. I think, like you always talk about, you go after certain vintage sets, but with Star Wars, you have little projects along the way where I've got, all right, I want to fill out the stickers for these. I want to get the OPG version of these. It's fun because, like I said, if you're not going crazy with it, and then all the 90s stuff that I never got to collect at all. And then it becomes where you have this library of cards where you can go back to. And Abrams Books did these wonderful books on the Star Wars ones. They have 5 of them, and then there's other ones they do, like Planet of the Apes, or I think they did Garage Pail Kids as well. So they become a great reference material for, even the casual fan that wants to go back. Like, maybe you don't want to collect the cards, but you want to see what they looked like, and it takes you back. And it really, I have the binder, the 77 binder in front of me. And, nothing makes me smile more. I look back at them and you go, yeah, it's a part of my childhood right there. And now I have the means to fill that hole that may have been there for 40 years. And that's what makes it fun.
Very cool. One of the things that you didn't really hit on that I'm curious about is the friendship or community aspect of collecting. And I'm just curious, from when you were a kid up through when you re-entered in 2015, how has the hobby community played a role in your enjoyment of getting back into cards?
Mike, great question. It's a huge role because growing up, there was a couple of us that collected the cards that were into Star Wars, but largely it was myself. Baseball was a little more, you could partner around with a couple people to do a couple of trades. But when I got back in, largely it was just me. And, I had been on Instagram and social media. But I think for a long time, if you were a collector, it wasn't necessarily something you brought up in conversation, like, oh, by the way, I collect Star Wars cards, and then you hear crickets. So when I decided I wanted to start kind of celebrating the cards and reaching out, I started an Instagram account, the Rebel Base Card, for that. And I found there wasn't a ton of people doing cards. There was a lot of folks doing, action figures, or doing, artwork, or doing, cosplay and whatnot. But, I found a couple of people right away, Star Wars cards and Star Wars Topps cards. And, it was fun because you start to build this nucleus, and then you start branching out, and you maybe post a card and people go, oh man, I remember that. And, building the following, and the Instagram channel and the podcast kind of almost go hand in hand, because we had Celebration, the big Star Wars convention, in Chicago last year. And we're both from Illinois here, or at least I am here now. So once I realized that I was going to go, that kind of pushed it up, and you start connecting with folks. And even in 2020 with Twitter, where a lot of podcasters are, and there's a lot more collectors there, and getting into even to the digital side of it, we've kind of built this nice community of folks that, none of this is our main job. This is just a side passion, but it's fun to share. It's fun to, even virtually, especially even in COVID times, you can still do it through the Card Trader app, whether you're doing Bunt or whether you're doing Star Wars. And you're trying to build sets, and you're doing that in addition to getting excited about physical product. There was kind of a release. They didn't release a little bit for a while. There was a bit of a break this year because of COVID. Now you're starting to see those wheels go back in motion, and we're all getting excited for this Mandalorian set that's coming out in November. And it's fun now. People, you're talking about pre-orders, but now you're getting these folks who are coming back in. You're getting a part of this community, and now you're this resource to tell people, hey, by the way, you can go here or you can go there. Maybe you want to pre-order it. Maybe you want to go on the shelf and got it. I was in line, and Topps released this Journey of the Child set. It was a blaster box, $10, 36 cards, the whole shebang. And I was telling a lady had the child Baby Yoda shirt on, and I said, you need to go get that. If you like Baby Yoda, go get that, because you may not be a collector, but you would love to have that, because that's a one thing. And then, hey, maybe if they open it, maybe if they like the cards they see, well, there's somebody else, and now you're spreading the love. That's all we're trying to do.
One of the questions that I get a lot when I'm doing interviews on other shows, or even from family members and people in the general public, is why do you collect sports cards, or why do you like baseball cards? From the conversations that you've had, from your own personal experience, from these relationships that you've been building, what would your answer be for why do you collect Star Wars cards?
Well, that's a great question. Back in the day, right? We're talking in the 70s. Films didn't make it onto the small screen for a number of years afterwards. So with Star Wars cards, you got these stills from the movie, and so that were sort of it was like a visual memory of that particular scene, or a favorite scene, in addition to, you see some of these great stills. And one of the cool things, and I didn't have a ton of them at the time, Series 5 did a lot of behind the scenes cards. And so you see these stills of, like, they're working on a creature, they're working on Chewbacca's makeup. And then in back of the cards, not only did you have that great puzzle on some of the vintage ones that made a bigger scene, but then you had these movie facts, you had these little character facts. And so, pre-internet, this is our Wikipedia, or Wikipedia, if you want to coin a phrase. And so, yeah, it just sort of, it takes you back to when it was not only a time when, like, I remember when this movie comes out, and you can go through and you can see these scenes, and some of these even can be non-common scenes. Like now, a lot of times it's great now when they release a new set and they go, here's images I didn't see that often. But even then, I'm looking at some of the vintage ones, and they're going, here's a shot where it didn't make it into the movie, but here's a shot of, Luke and a droid, or here's the two C-3PO droids, and you're like, that wasn't in the movie, or that wasn't in there. And so that, yeah, the thing is, it was just your visual memory of the movies, and it just goes hand in hand. But that just, and there wasn't a lot of them. 66 cards a set.
You're the host of the Rebel Base Card Podcast, which I love the name, by the way.
Thank you.
Kind of combining the Rebel Base and base cards. I love it. It's so good.
Thank you.
I'm curious about, what was the origin of the podcast? At what point did you decide that might be something that you want to jump into?
I have a media background. A career ago, I used to do, video and audio production. And I also, because I have a couple of employers, and a fruit company is one of them. We sell these the phones. Um, One of the things I'm most passionate about talking about is something that I can't talk about on a podcast. Can't talk about technology. So number two on the list was cards. And once again, when I decided I was going to go to Star Wars Celebration in Chicago, part of me always wants to try to capture video and audio. I want to talk to people. I want to find out their story because I have it. I have a background in doing that. And I used to kind of do it when I had a tech blog, and I used to go on interview and stuff. And with the phones now, it makes it so much easier because the quality of video, quality of audio you can get is astounding. And so once I kind of knew, I started prepping, and the main thing was to find out the easiest way to do it. And when you're talking about like things like Anchor and getting on, and that's when you start finding out that, especially even with cards, you find that there is, these sketch cards, and I never knew about those. You got back in, you go, well, autographs are what you want, or relics, but what are these sketch cards? And then you find there's artists that are producing these for Topps and other companies year after year, and those kind of become, I want to find out about their stories. And the people who are doing cosplay or people in the community, I want to find out, like yourself, I want to find out what motivates you. And it's so much fun to listen. It's so much fun to put it up there. And there's the tools are out there to make it sound really good, or at least better than. And as long as you are engaging with folks and you're listening, and you have that honest curiosity my father instilled me with, that you just want to find out more, it's become very rewarding. Life is always there. You have to find the most efficient ways to do it so that you have this balance as best you can. But when you have something in the books, and when you post it, and I go, that interview with, I can always refer back to our interview going, hey, look, if you want to find out more about shipping, go back and listen to my episode with Mike Summer, because he's going to give you some great tips. Or I can do an episode purely on collecting. Like, where do you start? Boom, start there. Or if you want to talk about digital cards, start there. If you want to find out, in events, in addition to, events or things like that, it just becomes a great, diary, journal, if you will. And, it's just fun listening to people.
You hit on something there that I want to explore for a minute. I'm a firm believer that increased knowledge and increased education adds to the overall enjoyment of the hobby and the overall exposure of the hobby to more and more people.
Agreed.
So if there is somebody who knows there are Star Wars cards, but doesn't feel like they know a lot about what's out there, but if they knew more, they might want to start collecting more Star Wars cards, what would be some resources, in addition to your podcast, that you would suggest that they go out and listen to, read, pick up, if it's a physical book, whatever it might be? What are some resources that collectors can use to educate them about Star Wars cards, the history, and both, the older stuff as well as the newer stuff? What would be some resources you'd recommend?
I'd always say start with the cards you collect with, and not everybody's going to start with the vintage set. Some people came of age during the prequels, the Phantom Menace and whatnot. Some people come of age, in the knots and whatnot. I always say you should use the cards you grew up with as your base. If you say, you know what, I'm really excited, I would like to get some cards, I would like to finish these, eBay is probably your first and best resource, because you can get a gauge for how much those are going to cost, whether you're looking to fill a couple of holes or an entire set. The one thing that's been absolutely critical for me as a collector going forward from that is, to me, I like Cardboard Connection a little better than Beckett, because, well, Beckett's purpose is for one thing, but Cardboard Connection, their new release calendar, gives me a gauge of how many sets, and you can get several months ahead. And then each of those sets, though, you can click on that they're going to say coming out, 8/5 is, I think it was at Chrome Perspectives, and you can find out more. And you can also find out whether it's retail or hobby. And it's probably one of the biggest keys is not all cards are released at the same places in the same configurations. Target is a great resource and Walmart's a great resource. And, for the first couple years, that was the only way I got them, for 2-3 years. But you build up as you get excited and you're picking up packs, you pick up a lot of dupes, and then you start to go, well, now I'm collecting a lot of product. I enjoy it, but now I've got all this extra, and they're keeping releasing movies. And now this, now what do I do with it? And so, finding out like, oh, there are these things called hobby boxes you can buy if you want to go there, and where you can get a full base set and a couple of, and a couple of hits or whatnot. What's a hit, So I like Cardboard Connection. If you're a vintage fan, those Abram books, I'll go back in time again. There was one for each movie. There's Star Wars Empire and Return of the Jedi, and two great books to go on beyond that. One on Star Wars Galaxy, which were the art-based cards, and in the Wide Vision that were mid-90s. And those I always use as reference books. Those are great. Also, in addition to that, there are a number of Facebook groups that for collectors. Some of them are a little more hardcore, and they're great. And that's the whole thing. You can, if you want to dive in, you can maybe feel a little overwhelmed just because a lot of people are making cases and things like that, and you're going, well, that's a lot of money, to outlay. But there's that whole breaking thing now that's happening that some people can just go after the cards they want, or if they just want an autograph, or they just want to go in for, like with baseball, team sets. And so there's these different ways to collect that, like I said, I think it starts back with what you started with. Use that as your core, because you'll have the most connection to that. And then use eBay, use, like Beckett or Cardboard Connection. Listen to the podcast. Why am I not saying that? But also you can find other people on either Instagram or social media, and you can start to build those relationships. And I think that will make the hobby so much more rich for you than simply, you could go on your own and collect and just be happy about it. Baseball is a great way. You collect baseball. I don't need a huge community to enjoy baseball cards. I love cracking packs. But if you want to try to broaden, I think, like the resources, we have so much more than we used to, podcasts and all that.
Yeah, I think that's great. Use the variety of resources that are out there. I really like that suggestion of starting with, the sets, or starting with the products that are going to mean the most to me, and use that as the foundation for exploring more and learning more about what else is there. You can start small and gradually build and expand. I think that's a great suggestion. And one of the other things that I wanted to touch on a little bit is maybe about some of the potential differences in sports cards and Star Wars cards or entertainment cards. And one of those that I've picked up on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my observation from what I've learned over the last several months, is something you also touched on earlier, is sketch cards. Now, there are some baseball and sport products that have sketch cards as one of the super rare types of hits that you can get in a product. But it seems with entertainment cards, sketch cards are almost a foundational hit. It's you get an autograph or a sketch card. And I think one of the first defaults that I came to is, oh yes, Star Wars cards, this box has relic cards and autographs as well. But it seems that as I learn more, that those sketch cards oftentimes are even more valuable than the autograph or relic card that is in a box. Is that accurate?
It is, yes. And this is something that came to Star Wars after the turn of the millennium, and it literally started with just simple sketches. And they have gone in their complexity and their detail now that literally you can call them art cards. And what you'll find is that, when you come back into it, an autograph is something a new collector can glean on right away, like, oh man, here is so-and-so. But since there are so many people in Star Wars, always has been, that, the third person that does a droid, may not garnish you as much value as, say, like if someone pulls a dual sig or a Carrie Fisher or something like that. So you got your main people, and then you've got other ones. And so the value, just like in baseball, you have the different values for different players and different roles. But going back now, it's harder to pull sketch cards, I think, at least because they can pull 60 or 70 or 80 sketch card artists. They'll do like maybe 30 cards each. But what is interesting is that who is doing the artwork can really have a factor on the value of that. There are some folks out there, Carlos, is it Cabrero? Let's say Chris Penix is doing the living set. You get who's those when you're getting in that level, those sketches can be a few $100s if you hit. Some sketches could be $15, $20, $30. But I think just the fact that they are a little harder to hit, like most boxes you see being sold, guaranteed auto. Topps is still kind of leading with that, and then might be another hit in there. But that hit could be a medallion card. It could be a patch, a relic, print and stuff. But sketch cards seem to be harder, and so yes, there is a limited number of them. The artists can vary in, they tend to be going more towards photorealism, but a lot of times you go, I've never heard of this artist, but some of these ones you get can be extremely valuable. Just go on eBay and look at the sold listings, and you can see some of these are amazing. So it's tough, I think, from a business standpoint, because you don't, you can go, if you're cracking a box, I'm getting an auto, no problem. If I don't like it, flip it, whatever. But you could go through a case and maybe not pull a sketch or pull one or two. And so it makes it very difficult to collect, which means their value is consistent and pretty much stays up. I don't see too many that go down in value, but I do see maybe the older sketch cards, when they were more sketch-like, are not as valuable as the ones you're pulling today.
One of the things that has been transpiring within the sports card world for the last year is rapidly escalating costs of sealed wax boxes. And I'm curious if Star Wars has seen the same thing recently, or are sealed wax boxes still available generally around the same price that they've always been?
I have seen, since I started getting more into the hobby boxes late last year and this year, where you're averaging, like some hobby boxes, depending upon the product, could be like let's say $100, $80 to $100, depending upon where you're buying it online, or you're going to buy it at your local store. And in some cases, some of those ones can get you a full base set, a hit or two, and you're kind of good. There are some times where Topps will break these up into smaller boxes for, let's say, 50, 60, $70, but it'll take you a while to build a set. I think because of the numbers of cards, I think Star Wars lends itself a little more to base set collecting, only because you're not seeing, like, say, 500 or 600 cards in a set, or like a 200 card set, say, like for a Marvel. So you can still really chase base sets. But I do think that they, every time I think that they're going to creep up, I think we're seeing the Mandalorian one, which is more of these small boxes, and they're going to be like, 60 or so, 60-ish pre-orders. Women of Star Wars that came out earlier this year was a $50 hobby box, but it was, it was partial. You were only going to get like 7 or 8 packs. And so I'm still seeing a variation of smaller hobby boxes, large ones, and then you get into, like, say, Masterwork or Stellar Signature, where these are a couple $100, or I think Stellar Signature, I want to say it's like $1,000 or something. There's some that, because Topps will range the amount of product. Some will just be for retail, some will be for high-end collectors. But I haven't necessarily seen anything that says it's going up, but I think time will tell because of COVID, whether they'll go up. But, this is not like it was 5-6 years ago. I think it's probably inched up a little bit, but it's still something where I'm still factoring in, okay, if I got $100, that's probably, if I'm going to get a $100 hobby box, I'm going to probably get a whole set out of it, base set. Nah, that saved me from how much I blew in 2015 on blaster boxes for the Journey 2 and the Force Awakens Series 1 and 2. I pumped a lot of money into those first 2 years retail. If I just would have bought a hobby box, I go, well, I could move on now to the next thing. So increasing a little bit, maybe, but still, to me, consistent that I've seen over the last year or so.
One of the other things that you see a lot in sports cards are people collect in a variety of different ways. There's some people who are set collectors and like to build full complete sets. There are some people who are team collectors and only want to get those Cubs cards. And there are player collectors who focus purely on a handful of players to round out their collection. Are there similar approaches in Star Wars? Do you have people who only collect Chewbacca or Han Solo or Luke, or do you have people who, I only collect characters who are in the Empire or who are in the First Order or whatever it might be? Or do you see more of that overall full set building?
I see a lot of I see more in the groups where I see folks who they're going to buy boxes and cases for the autos. Sometimes they'll want to sell them, sometimes they'll keep them. So some people really like collecting just the autos, and the base cards become more of the disposable ones. Or, if you're breaking a case, and each of those boxes have a base set where you can flip that base set pretty easy. I am more of a base set collector. To me, it's how it started. It's how I kind of go. I enjoy the hits, and I like the fact that they come little by little. There's a couple of autographs I bought. So, for example, Masterwork, which is a large set to put together, you couldn't do it without buying several boxes, $200 each or something like that. So I said, well, maybe I just want to collect the Rebels signatures, or a certain, property of those signatures. It makes like a little mini set. Or there was a character in The Last Jedi, Captain Peavy, Adrian Edmondson, who was in The Young Ones back in MTV back in the days. Well, he had a character, and so I've been trying to collect his autographs. He has a relic card. He has a patch card, and just to make a nice little mini set. But I think just because Star Wars cards still the base sets are fairly low number, you still see people going for base sets and trying to trade them. I think the autograph traders are another group. And, some people, I interviewed one guy earlier this year who just collects his friends' sketch cards. Kelly Baber is a sketch artist. His friend Mac has a huge collection and goes after only his autographs or his sketch cards. He could care less about anything else, but for him, that's an attachment to his friend. So you have these different ones, but I think the autographs are very common. I think character-wise, just on a tangent, in the Star Wars Card Trader app, there's people who hoard cards of a particular character. They'll find an obscure character and they'll try to get as many cards as they can of that character. I've done it because when I'm trading with people, since I've been on Card Trader longer, I have a bigger collection. And so if someone's coming in new, it's harder for them to find a need I have. So I said, you know what? I'm hoarding Captain Pyre from Resistance. If you need this insert, give me the Pyres you have, these common base cards. And so now I have, 800-900 cards of just, is it Commander Pyre? Commander Pyre. And so it makes it fun because it's a different way for me to collect, but I can still reach out to the community. But with this, I still think people still chase value in the autographs. Base is always, it's like the NBA regular season, right? Who cares about the regular season? I want to see the playoffs. But there's always that value, just like in baseball or sports cards. It's the base cards that's the foundation of our whole deal. Yours and mine is card number 325 of whoever it is that particular year. That starts it all for me.
Do you have any other tips that you would suggest for somebody who's wanting to get into Star Wars cards or learn a little bit more?
The biggest thing I can say is that there are several releases, just like with sports cards, throughout the year, and it's been pretty consistent since Disney bought Star Wars. And Topps has still been a licensee. You can try to collect them all, and for a time you kind of go after. But I go back to Cardboard Connection. I look at the releases. Nice enough, I have I can even ask for a sales sheet from Topps from time to time. But I try to find those sets that I'm interested in, throughout the year. Some of the higher end ones I may stay away from. The retail ones I always say are a great lightning rod, because you can always pick them up in different ways. You can go through if you're making a target run, or and I think that's a good way to kind of get in. And $20 in for a blaster box is a nice in, and you can enjoy it. And those you can decide whether or not you want to go from there. I think that you have to decide what you want to collect and why. Why am I doing this? If I like Star Wars and I like the different cards, there may be sets that I don't really have that much of interested in. I don't care too much about the Chrome stuff, but I like the Mandalorian. Mandalorian was a great show. Everybody, you probably have kids that go, Baby Yoda. But that's a touchstone that people can, maybe new people coming into the hobby and goes, well, I'm not huge into cards, but I really like the Mandalorian. Oh, that's cool. We had an event here in Chicago where Dominic Pace, who was an extra in the Mandalorian, came out. And he was promoting like small businesses and charities. And I took Topps Now did a card that his character was in, and I had him sign it. And I said, for me, this is the world, because this to me is a connection to this card. And I definitely want to see more of him in that, but I also want to see that one because The Mandalorian meant a lot to me. I'm really going to dig those cards. I know a lot of the people I deal with in the community are going to want those cards, and it's going to make a nice event. Whereas some of these other sets, some of the harder, I'm friends with folks who are really into these particular sets, and they want just that, or they might just collect Luke from that, or they're looking for particular sketch cards or artist proofs, and that's cool. And but it's like I can wave either way. I can collect either way, but you really just have to go back to collect what you like. Don't worry about trying to get them all. And then, once you start getting them, how am I going to store them? How am I going to protect them? And I think, some people will use boxes. I like binders because I can pull it off of a shelf and I can enjoy that without hurting the card much. But it's almost like a book. I can go back through and relive that, or if I want to reference something, I think the other biggest thing is I use Scotch. I don't use Scotch tape. I use like a masking or like a painter's tape on my binders because I'm constantly reshuffling them around, and it's easier just to go, all right, Sharpie and that's what this is now, but next week I might rearrange the collection, but it just makes it easier for me to go back rather than them being in a box. I have plenty in boxes, but it's just so much easier. I think a lot of people's collections stay good because they don't pull them out of the shoebox they got them from. And by the way, if you want to start your kids out collecting, last tip, sorry. Back in the day, I used to take a shoebox. You cut it in half, you use the lid, and you kind of glue the box up. You can almost make this little pull-out shelf, and that's what I did, and use a little string. And I did that for years with some of my sports cards because it was an easy way, like, to protect them. You go out, and you pull them in, and you put them back in. So shoebox, everybody has shoeboxes, right? There you go. You don't have to even spend a penny on it.
Well, thank you for coming on to the show. I think that was some great information for people to pick up on, listen in on, and learn a little bit more about the world of collecting Star Wars cards. So I appreciate it, Greg. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, no problem. And just to let your listeners know on the podcast, it's not always me talking. I can go, I can fill, but I usually have guests on so that they don't have to listen to me talk.
And where can people find you and find the show?
Alrighty. The show, if you in most of your major podcast catchers like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, you can look for the Rebel Base Card Podcast. I am on Instagram at Rebel Base Card, as well as Twitter, Facebook. I also have a small following there as well. And then you can always email the show, greg@rebelbasecard.com. Send questions, send comments. I'll take it one and all. It's been a fun ride.
All right. Thank you very much.